Our topic today is environmental governance during times of COVID-19 and how the role of youth can be strengthened in those very special times. This will be a webinar with many people. We have 100 people here in this call. So please, everyone, make sure to stay muted so that we can hear each other very well. And I welcome all of you from different part of the world. It's very great to have you here. We also have people connected on YouTube that will be able to interact with us through the chat. So very happy to see your interaction. This webinar is hosted by UNEP, a major group for children and youth, the youth constituency towards United Nations Environmental Programme. Great. I'm passing over to Ena to explain us a little bit about the technical background.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anna, and I'm here today on behalf of Eduactive in order to help you about your technical part. So we're currently having two main channels of interaction, meaning the Zoom meeting where you're all here in the webinar form, meaning that none of you can speak if you're not allowed. So please use the small thing that says raise your hand on the right of the chat box, raise your hand, and then some of us will allow you to be able to speak. We also created two other elements in order to interact, and this is also valid for all those who are right now following us on YouTube. We have also the YouTube link, and you can also make chats interaction through YouTube. If you go on the link that's tell us where you're from, which you're seeing on your screen, you're going to open a Padlet presentation with a world map where we would like to ask you to pin yourself in order to have a geographical representation of the entire participation list. Furthermore, if you want to ask specific questions right now and you cannot find the chat box, or you cannot find the chat box through YouTube, that's perfectly fine. Just go to the Slido webpage, slido.com, enter the code youth environment, and we are going to go through that. For anything else that you may need, if you get confused, if you don't know how to interact, if you have technical questions, just text me on the chat box. You have to go hashtag @Anna or @Eduactive, and I'll come and go through your questions and through your technical needs. YouTube should be live. If there are people who are there, just use the chat box on your right, and you're going to see each other just there for asking questions. That's everything from my side, so let's enjoy the conversation.
Thank you very much, Anna. Allow me to give you a quick overview of our webinar today. We will have a 10-minute welcome and introduction session. Then we have a briefing from our guests. Very much looking forward to that. Then we have several scheduled interventions from some of our members. And after that, we have further basically responses to the interventions, and of course, an open discussion with questions from the audience. This is on the one hand from everyone who's here in the call, but also we have someone monitoring the chat on YouTube. So feel free to just add your questions there and use the Slido link that you have received also via email in order to interact with us. I'm handing over to my colleague, Yuvratna.
Once again, welcome everybody. So as you saw, the first 10 minutes are welcoming and introductions, and I think you already welcomed people in that. I'm very, very glad that we are here. It's a very challenging time that we are all in, and the fact that everyone, including Ms. Anderson and all of the other colleagues from the UN system, from different youth groups that have joined here today, we are very grateful for your participation in these challenging times and making time to join. Maybe we can go to the next slide, I guess. Is it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to provide you a brief overview of what are we doing or who we are. I think the title is a bit got a bit jinxed, but in terms of the youth constituency to UN Environment, or the major group to the UN Environment, serves as a democratic platform for engagement of youth entities within different topics, within different scopes. Third being youth action and also supporting resource mobilization of young people and supporting them in their role on capacity building and training them. So these are, this is just a quick overview, and we can, of course, we are happy to chat with you later on how you can be involved if you're not already involved in this process, and how you can get more engaged. Maybe we can go to the next slide, I believe. Yeah, so without wasting any further time, I'd like to invite our guest Singer, who has kindly joined us, so to give briefing presentation, and then we move on to a set of interventions and also taking questions from the groups that are here. We'll post the slide link again in the chat for you to be able to ask more questions directly. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you very, very much, Gretna, Teresa, Anna, and all the others that have helped organize this. If there was one thing I'd like to do on Earth Day, it's clearly this. So you come as very much the icing on the topping of the cake here. Thank you very much for asking me. And thank you to everybody that has dialed in. And I want to recognize, first of all, that these are extraordinary times and very difficult times. And I'm sure that some of those who are on the dial-in are particularly affected one way or the other by this terrible disease and the pandemic. So my heart goes out to everyone that is suffering right now. The first point that I'd like to make is that even though we're here to talk about environment, I want to say that the first response to COVID-19 has to be a medical one. And so that's obviously clear. And I think everyone on this call joins the Secretary General in celebrating and in paying tribute to health workers, to community workers, to those who deal with outreach, elder care, et cetera, in our communities, dealing with this immediate medical dimension of this crisis. I think that if we'd spoken a year ago, and someone were to say, is it possible that you lock down the entire humanity, more or less, give and take, that all children stop going to school? Very few people would have thought that that would be even possible. And yet here we are today. And so understanding, therefore, that what COVID-19 has done is that a fundamental shift in our understanding. And I think we will find a world in the post-pandemic setting that will be forever altered. And so we who work on environment need to think about what are we doing in the now, in the middle of the pandemic, and what are we going to be doing in the after. And there's not a more fitting time than to do this today with the next generation, with those that are putting their shoulder to the wheel on activism, with those that are questioning and forcing the hand of politicians towards action. So I really thank you for this. Now, the first message that I have is that, and you may have seen me say so in the media, COVID we must not celebrate COVID and as a silver lining to environment. Yes, I know that city air in New Delhi and Mexico and Cairo, etc., is amazingly clean. And yes, I know that there are penguins in the streets of Cape Town, and yes, and goats and dolphins and what have you in various waterways. But the point here is that unless we take this as a lesson for how we can shift, how humanity in the response to COVID decided to take action because our back was literally against the wall, unless we take that commitment into a new green world with investments that are sustainable, we will have lost an opportunity. And certainly this 8 weeks of halt, whilst we have local air pollution reduced, it will in no way have an impact of any significant way, shape, or form on climate change. Only systemic shifts will have that. So that's the first message. But the second message that I say is, if we are now looking at, since we're now looking at this terrible, terrible emergency, the first, as those who deal with environment, and early action clearly needs to be. We've had a lot of campaigns on plastic, we've had a lot of campaigns on chemicals, we've had a lot of work done on waste management. And we saw in Wuhan, for example, that the medical sector during the height of the pandemic went from about 240 tons a day of waste. Went from about 40 tons a day of waste to 240. So a six-fold increase nearly. So we need to think about this amount of medical waste, and it'll be plastic, and it'll be toxic, and it'll be highly infectious, etc., and make sure that in those places, and there are many, that this doesn't end up in the water streams, that even if they do not have incineration, that it gets packaged and managed appropriately in accord with the Basel Convention guidelines. So medical waste, a big thing that clearly hasn't been considered, but as environmental professionals, we need to be mindful of. And I'm very pleased that my colleagues in the Basel Convention Secretariat have gotten very active and so on. I'll stop that part now, but clearly the waste I mentioned too. The environmental response that we need to give to COVID is one that we need to consider. And here, I want to draw your attention to the UNEP report called Frontiers, which is a report that comes out that sort of looks into the horizon and says, okay, we know what we have today, but what are the new things that we, UNEP, what's our responsibilities to say to the world, look, this thing is coming our way. We're telling you that it's a thing we need to be mindful of. Frontiers report comes out every 2 years at the UNEA. And the last Frontiers, so the 2016 Frontiers report speaks to zoonoses. Zoonoses are essentially diseases that jump, as we know, from the animal world, zoological world, thus zoonosis, to human beings, and often through an intermediary. It could be a bat or a flea or a rat or what have you. And these zoonoses, we said in 2016, planetary health and ecosystem health on the one side, and human health, you can't think of these separate. You got to be sound in your management of ecosystems. You can't erode forests and natural systems. You can't trade illegally and have illegal wet markets that do not have sanitary conditions. This will be a petri dish for disaster. You cannot bring diseases together that are supposed to live in diverse and dispersed ecosystems. So the takeaway in the post-COVID setting is clearly get an ambitious biodiversity framework in the post-2020 framework for COP15. Make sure that people adhere to and countries adhere to their CITES commitments. Deal with and implement the CMS, the Convention for Migratory Species Agreements. It is around biodiversity and it is around safeguarding nature. So that's sort of a big piece, and understand that planetary health and human health are connected. And the third piece clearly deals with, we're going to see massive amount of stimulus packages. Money's being shot into the economy for a very good reason. There's already a big shot of injection of cash that has already happened. And you will have heard the Secretary General say, you know, let that money go to the poorest, protect the poorest in terms of social protection. And it's time now to show international solidarity. Because if you have one COVID case, you have everybody having a COVID case. So it is just like smallpox, it needs a global mobilization. And so on the stimulus, yes, the first part of the stimulus will always be about getting money into people's pockets, food into people's mouths. You can't green that stimulus. Just do it and push it out there. Make sure you protect the poorest. But the second stimulus package and the third wave tend to be infrastructure, to give people jobs, to build stuff, to fix stuff. Look at the green opportunities in that. Leapfrog into clean. You don't have to go through a polluting age. Let's find a way of leapfrogging into green and clean. And so that part of building back better the green stimulus, my third point, is key. And one that we're pushing a lot of emphasis, putting a lot of emphasis on. And here I'd say that the major group on children and youth, you have been unfairly carrying a big load on climate to get the world to understand the importance of action on climate change. And you have been phenomenal in so doing. We need you again, because it needs everybody at the putting their shoulder to the wheel. And we need you to also speak up on, yes, of course, the waste. Yes, of course, the zoonosis and the planetary health and human health, and therefore an ambitious agreement at COP15. And yes, absolutely building back better, building back green, leapfrogging to green. And you have a brilliant voice and a great leader, a set of leaders. And I am very optimistic that with you, we can land this. So I don't want to take too much time because I'm much more interested in the dialogue. So with that, then, Iratna, let me hand it back to you, if I may, and then we can have an interactive dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inger. And these were some sort of guiding thoughts that we were. I'm not sure if you can still hear me. You had prepared. We had prepared for you, but I think we want this dialogue, to be more organic in nature, and young people to come up with their own questions rather than being guided by some sort of thoughts already. So I think we already have two youth advocates from our side who sort of prepared something to already present. So I would like to invite them first and then open the floor for a broader youth audience. So first we have Christian from Trinidad and Tobago. And Christian, I think you are presenter, so you should be able to present yourself, I believe. If not, we can make you a panelist so you can present. Or otherwise,
help me please find out what's his name. Christian Zakur.
That's Christian
Okay.
Zakur. Yeah, she's the one. Yes.
Just 20 seconds and she'll be online with you.
No problem.
Here you go. Christian, you should be right now listening to us from the panelist list. If you are, please unmute your microphone and switch on your video. Christian?
Perfect.
It's on. Okay. Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, so let me just begin by saying that this is an honor to be able to represent. And also, I prefer not to be on video, if you don't mind.
That's perfect.
So I am from Trinidad and Tobago, which is a country in the Caribbean. And our GDP depends mainly on oil and gas exports and downstream manufacturing. And I'm also an environmentalist who sees unsustainable development happening in my country. And it's a common phenomenon that developing countries try to mimic the development of first world countries. I say this in quotes. And therefore we rush to improve the economy at the expense of the environment. In this time of the COVID-19 crisis, the world is in a state of limbo, and we anticipate long-lasting social and economic impact for its policies. So right now we have a unique chance to reevaluate and steer our respective countries towards a more sustainable future. And I say this in the context of the oil market crash a few days ago. How do you suggest that developing countries reevaluate their plans for the future during this time to include sustainable development?
Thank you. How would you like to do this, Iratna? Would you like me to respond on individual questions? I'm happy to, but whatever. I mean, you're the boss here.
Thank you. I think we'll take maybe more questions, one from Nathan, and then we start questions from the audience, and then we give you an opportunity to respond. Yeah. So, Nathan, are you a panelist? Not yet. Ina, that would be Nathan Martinier. So
He or she's not online.
really?
I cannot
Okay.
see them in the attendees. So
Okay, then we go to directly questions from the audience. Teresa,
sorry,
back to
they
you.
have a different name. It's Yi Yi. Okay, I'm coming. Yi Yi. Just give me a second.
Yeah.
Promote panelist.
Okay.
20 seconds and you're gonna be with us. Okay. Done. You're with us. Here is your. Okay, perfect. Fabulous.
Sorry about that. This is actually the name of my organization. I'm sorry. Here, Nathan, thank you a lot for allowing me to represent the Europe region, if I can say that. I am a 20 years old French student. I represent Youth and Environment Europe, which is the largest network of youth and environmental organization across Europe's region. And last year, we realized that young people were, not present or even represented in the European Union decision-making processes on climate and environmental issues. And it's quite astonishing, right? Because we always say that the EU is so good on environmental issues and other things, but maybe not on youth involvement. And we gathered with the main European Youth Network, and we founded Generation Climate Europe. So it's the first coalition of youth European NGOs and network to advocate on climate and environmental issues toward the EU institutions. Because, is it because we are young, sometimes even age 18, 20, like me, 22 years old, that we cannot be part of the processes that will determine and shape our future? So we have walked the talk on the European Green Deal course. That was our activity here, our news on the European Youth Climate Dialogue with the commissioners, were as well engaging with them. Even more than before, I think crisis shows like never before. I mean, it's hard to say that because I'm only 20, but it shows that we need a holistic approach, a mainstreaming of the environmental concerns in all areas of policymaking processes, right? But this is a struggle. For example, here we've obliged to change our strategy, and instead of calling to, strongly improve the European Green Deal here, what we would do before, we are in a position where we need to say, no, wait, we want to protect this Green Deal. We need to defend it as it is, even if it's not enough. And yes, at the end of the day, if we could make a link, a simple link between the ongoing pandemic and the destruction of our ecosystem and biodiversity, I really think that this could be a breakthrough. Then we could really raise awareness on the consequences of humans' action against our environment. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that and the possible strategies we can have? Thank you.
Thank you. Ugratna, may I respond to those two and then we can go back out?
Yes, perfect. Yes.
Okay, great. Let me start with Nathan and then come to Christian. Thank you for that. And it's really great that Generation Climate Europe, that you established it to create that voice, because it is about creating a voice, being present. I think this SG, the Secretary General, has often said, power is not given, it is taken. And so I think it is by being present, showing up, and having a voice and engaging that you can influence. And so bravo to you. It is true that what we've seen with the pandemic is such that everything has, all the tectonic plates have shifted in a sense. What we thought is no more, and what we could not possibly imagine it to be is. So on the issue of making that link between the pandemic and climate destruction and planetary security, if you like, and protection of the Earth systems, or the systems that regulate the Earth, here's what I would suggest that you may choose to look at. First of all, be very mindful that, your point is, you have an example. Actually, when our back is against the wall, we can do something. The trouble with climate, for a moment, is that it's slower. Well, we've been at this for 25 years. And so it's not like we haven't discovered that it was an issue. We are living in dramatically changed times. And here, I think that there's also a message to be had. Look, world, you thought COVID-19 was bad. We will get through this. We will have lost people. There will be economic crisis. There will be people who dropped into poverty, but we as a civilization will get through it. But climate change, I'm not so sure, right? Because you can't dial that one back. Once you're in a 4 or 5 degree world, you can't dial it back. And that's the issue that I think we need to make clear. And so the second point that I would say is, make it very, very clear that there are these amazing opportunities. People have now seen in heavily polluted areas, they have seen clean air that they didn't think they were going to see in their lifetimes. So they've seen clean air. You've seen these incredible pictures that are cut in half with deeply polluted half picture and a clean half other picture. So people have seen that. They will not soon forget it. This will be like the Second World War moment of our generation. This will be this moment where we realize that actually all this filth we're living in is our own creation, and we can get beyond it. So insist that leapfrogging and that clean and green is the only way forward. And this is where I've emphasized the issue on the stimulus. That stimulus will be massive because we will find a global crisis that will be so vast that we will not have seen it in living memory. And so there will be significant stimulus, and rightly so, to protect the poor and to create jobs and to create opportunities. That stimulus need to be pro-poor, but also need to be pro-green. And so in protecting the Green Deal, this is your inroad to, as I see it, because there will be stimulus packages, but they need to be fully aligned and underpinning the European Green Deal, which leads me to Christian's point. It is hard when you are an economy that is oil and gas based, right? I get that. And it is very hard when you see that the crash that we're now seeing on oil and gas prices. And it is hard, especially when this is not an economy that has other big sectors that can just lift up the economy and make it march forward. And so this is where global solidarity comes in. You know, we can't vilify countries that have a dependency in terms of their export and their financial setup on hydrocarbons. This is where we have for the longest time, and the youth movement have for the longest time been campaigning for solidarity, for the Green Climate Fund investments, etc., to wean ourselves off this and to invest in clean and green. And here I think that the youth action, it's harder when you have an economy that is so hydrocarbon dependent. But you will also have seen, I'm sure, Christian, that in your country, you know, there has been, you know, as you see in all oil producing countries, that dependence on these jobs. How do you shift them over? It is something that will take decades. But we are now in the final run for the Sustainable Development Goal and the decade of reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is where global solidarity has to come in, and this is where we all have to lean in. So let me stop here. There's a much more to say, but I'm very, very keen to hear from others. So I'll pass it back over to you, Granda.
Thank you very much for this intervention. No problem. we do a bit mix here. We have one more intervention from one of our members, and then we are passing over to the questions that we have on Slido and online on YouTube. I just wanted to quickly say we are aware that at the start of this video there were some minutes where there was nothing visible on YouTube. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, sorry for that. We are aware, very sorry for that. I would like to pass over to Elizabeth from Zimbabwe.
Hello? Hello?
I hear you. Perfect.
Oh, okay. I'm not so sure if you'll be able to see me.
We do.
Oh, okay. My name is Elizabeth Gulugulu, an environmentalist from Zimbabwe. I'm representing an organization called the African Youth Initiative on Climate Change, and it is such an honor. Seeing that most resources will be diverted to health due to this global crisis, COVID-19, this might really affect the livelihoods of people, especially young people from where I come from, who rely on certain goods and services from forests. I'm talking about honey and some traditional foods. How can we actually strike a balance in terms of supporting these communities? Because we actually need the support, but maybe resources might not be there because they are most likely going to be channeled to the health sector. There is also need to improve on how communities can respond to shocks such as COVID-19 in the midst of a climate crisis. For example, here in Zimbabwe, last year we had a drought. This year we are most likely going to have another drought. We keep on having droughts time and again, and it has affected food security, nutrition, water quantity, and contributed to water scarcity and some diseases outbreaks. And now, because of this global crisis, we are having a lot of problems in terms of food transportation. I'm talking about agricultural trade, and it has affected to food losses because food is not being transported well in time. And it's so heartbreaking to experience food losses in a food insecure country. So as young people, as children, as youth, we are actually being affected because we tend to be ignored most of the times. And I think maybe this can be a suggestion that we are actually hoping if there could be a finance mechanism, for instance, maybe adaptation should cushion communities not to slide back to poverty through sustainable, this could be through sustainable land use practices such as supporting home nutritional gardens or hydroponics, establishment of policies that does not affect food systems and our biodiversity in times of crisis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you allow, we'll add one more question. I see we have 45 questions on Slido. We'll see how far we get, but I don't think we have a month, so let's see. One question from Nadine Klopton. How can we best amplify and integrate the teachings of indigenous groups, such as living in reciprocity with Earth, into environmental policy across our systems? Again?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you for mobilizing on the African Initiative, which is really good. Look, I think we have to be honest enough to say that, yes, resources will go towards COVID because people are dying. And so I think that is what we've seen from the wealthiest countries to the poorer countries. The question is what we do the day after we begin to have a handle on the pandemic. Because what we said in 2016 is still there. Look, today, infectious diseases that are in the human setting, 60% of these are zoonoses, are from the animal world, from our interference with nature, if you like. 75% of new infectious diseases are zoonotic in nature. And today we as a civilization, we've interfered with about 75% of the land, of the Earth's surface. So let's at least leave the 25% there and not continue to erode. We erode about 100 million hectares a year, if I'm not mistaken, but please double check that because I'm not sure I'm right on the numbers, so don't tweet it, please. But at any rate, so we erode massive amount of tropical forest and of other landscapes, right? So your points are very well taken because the poorest people are relying on nature's resources for often their income, their food, and their security and sustainability. And so you refer to this, and now the little resources that may otherwise be going to them, your fear is that they may be diverted. I think it's a fear that I would wish to recognize, which is why the United Nations Secretary General has established a global fund to deal with the social and the economic effects of this crisis. And the first will be exactly to protect the poor and to deal with a medical catastrophe. We at UNEP are leaning in on the 3 points that I mentioned earlier on: waste, zoonosis, and building back better. Because we must find a way of ensuring that that financial mechanism is in place. I would also think that established mechanisms that fund, for example, biodiversity, such as a global environment facility. I know that they're thinking, we really need to engage and ensure that zoonosis and sustainability is taken care of. Which leads me to the second question, which I didn't get the name of the person, asking about how we can amplify the teaching of indigenous peoples. I mean, I have learned much from many of our indigenous colleagues and indigenous societies. And when you study at their feet, you will understand, and I think that the person who asked the question knows better than me, that it is because we are out of sync with nature that we have reached the point where we are now. And indigenous teachings very much tell us about living in harmony with nature, which, by the way, is the overarching objective of the Biodiversity Convention. And how do we do that? We do that by treating nature as a friend, not as something to be dominated or exploited. We do that by not polluting our waterways and by, frankly, walking gently on this planet. Now, we do need infrastructure, and we do to survive, and we need agriculture, and we need fisheries, but we need to do this with a nature positive dimension so that we don't fish the oceans empty, and so that we don't toxify the lands with chemicals, etc., and so that we don't pollute the air. And whilst environmentalism at one point, and environmental stewardship at one point was an afterthought, first we develop and we get wealthy, and we do that by paving over and extracting and emitting. And then we think about, oh, we better clean up now. It wasn't a very good model, but it was possible, don't get me wrong, because we didn't have as many people on the planet as we do now. But as we do now, we are impacting people. 7 to 9 million people die on air pollution every year, prematurely every year. That's not a small number. So being mindful of the impacts that we are having on human health, this we have been taught by indigenous people. And so in everything that I do, I try to reflect back on those teachings because, and certainly I will salute the indigenous organizations who have been very active, for example, in the Biodiversity Convention, in some of the nature-related conventions, and are beginning also, not beginning, but in the last 5-7 years, have become ever more active on the climate side. This is really good. Lots have been learned in this regard. And as we head towards the decade for ecosystem restoration, which will start in the beginning of 2021, making sure that we restore in the manner that respects nature, in a manner that respects indigenous people's rights, in the manner that we use in indigenous knowledge and species and not start with exotics. These will be the kind of ways that we can begin to right what we have done wrong.
Thank you very much for that intervention, that response, sorry. I think one good thing to mention here is also, as a reply additionally to Nadine, that there is a global youth caucus on indigenous rights. And of course, the ecosystem restoration decade that you have mentioned is a big project where there's also a lot of youth involvement possible in case anyone's interested to join on that one. After the scheduled interventions and some Slido, I'll now see if I can select some people from the chat within this chat, and then we take some from YouTube after that. First of all, we have Haley. Haley Campbell. I don't know if she has access already.
No, not yet, because she's
okay, then I'll
give you a second. Can you please just, if you're listening to this, contact us in the chat so I can immediately make you give you the floor? No, no. Can you go just with the next one so we can?
Yes, absolutely.
She's typing in the chat.
Yeah. Haley. Okay, Haley Campbell. We're coming to you. Just give me
Sorry for Anna for all the stress.
No.
This is also COVID times where we realize how important
Don't stress.
technical
Don't stress. It's all
problems are.
good. You're doing
Ellie,
great.
the floor is yours.
All right, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, cool. Oh, wow. Well, thanks for picking me to share my question and for being here today. I'm from the United States, and as many of you know, there's been a huge lack of leadership, not only with COVID-19, but also in the climate crisis and even with restoring our ecosystems. So my question is, I guess twofold. First, how do you perceive that as a potential barrier to climate action and ecosystem restoration as a whole? And I mean, knowing that there's a bunch of bottom-up action going on, that's not going to be enough. But also, what are specific strategies do you think that we as the youth can take to help further act in terms of ecosystem restoration, as opposed to just, raising awareness about it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll pair this with the second one. Let's see if sorry, I don't really know how to pronounce it, is already able to speak.
Yeah, I do have those 3 accounts on that name. Techno, Camon 12, Camon CX, and Spark 2. Which one is the one that wants to speak?
I think
I think
Camon
it's
12.
I think he already typed his question in the chat as well, directly, I think. So maybe we can read that out, or oh no, that's not Techno, that's someone else, sorry.
Techno,
would
if
be
you're listening to us,
Techno
just let us know in the chat which account would you like to be connected to be able to speak.
It's the Techno Camon, I think.
Yeah.
Camon CX or 12 Pro?
12 Pro.
12 Pro,
It's,
okay. Here it goes. You just have to unmute your mic. And you're unmuted. You should be able to speak right now.
Rex?
Yes.
Amazing.
Hello.
Yes,
We
we
hear
hear
you.
you.
Perfect.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes. Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Okay, my name is Rex from Nigeria. Hello.
Yes,
Yes, we hear you.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Because of this pandemic, this COVID-19, I think in the West African sub-region, particularly in Biafran land, Nigeria, we are having issues of rise in the number of cases of those who test positive. Is there anything that the environment is trying to do the environmentalists trying to do, especially in horrid regions of Nigeria? Because I'm wondering if this COVID-19 will fly and go and hide at the trees and the leaves, and thereby coming down as an airborne pandemic back to people again, because we have a lot of trees.
Okay,
I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
I understand perfectly. Thank you. Teresa, do you want me to address Rex and Haley's questions?
That would be perfect, yes.
All right. So maybe I start with Haley, and she spoke about the barriers to climate action and ecosystem restoration, and particularly maybe reflecting on her own country and what has been the prevailing position in the latter years, and what actions youth could take, just to remind folks. And I think here, what we have seen is, of course, that there's been a decision to step out of the Paris Accord. This is no secret. Clearly, what we say is, you can't negotiate with nature and you can't negotiate with climate change. It is happening, and so now is not the time to leave the negotiating table. Now is the time to stay. And we very much hope that the US would come back. At the same time, I think it's fair to say that, we have seen quite a lot of climate action in the US from states, as well as from companies, as well as obviously from activists. And a lot of science on climate is actually coming out of US universities and and from US scientists. So that there's a lot to be mindful of, that it's not, that it's a complex setting. Now, what youth can take, on ecosystem restoration, here it's interesting because actually you see US Forest Service and other services are actually very much trying to engage on the restoration side, which is quite exciting and a very positive move that we certainly back and support. And on both of these agenda items, because they are so interlinked, we very much would hope that youth and civil society and across the world, but including in Haley's country, would stay engaged, would involve themselves in their own communities insofar as ecosystem restoration is concerned, because it's not just in the other place, it's in my place too. So we all have a task to do, and will involve themselves in the local communities in terms of promoting and engaging on renewable energy. You have some choices in some of the energy providers where you can actually make choices as to where your energy is coming from. It is quite exciting. And what we are seeing, of course, is that there's been the price of renewable in the US markets have come down, which is very, very interesting and has made it quite competitive. So I hope that Haley will continue engaging and working on both ecosystem restoration as well as climate action. Rex, I'm not an epidemiologist, so I can't speak to this, but one thing that we do know is that this COVID-19, it will not be over. It's a virus that will be in human society. Maybe we can be lucky and strike a vaccination that we can all get so that we can have a resistance to it. But viruses mutate. This is why we get different flus every year. And so now it's here. I don't think that we will sort of see the end of it, but it won't lurk in trees or on leaves or on packages. We know that this virus, it's encapsulated in certain membranes of fat, and it doesn't live long, especially in the open nature. The primary thing that we need to do during the rise of the epidemic, which is what you reflect in Nigeria, is hand washing, social distancing, isolation. These are the primary ways that we can flatten the curve of transmission. So big crowds, nope. Big markets, nope. And it's very hard for countries where you have informal settlements and people are living very close, which is why the UN's UN Water, that has been working with many partners on water supply. This is not a UNEP thing, but has working on water supply and sanitation is critical, especially in informal settlements. Unfortunately, we can expect that the virus will become global and will unfortunately probably hit all countries. And so the way that we want to deal with it is to flatten the curve by isolating and by very good hygiene. Two types of hygiene: virus hygiene, distance, as well as hand hygiene and not touching our faces. This is the way we will avoid this virus. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Inger, again for that. Now, while we continue this, I would also like to recognize the presence of some of our colleagues from IRENA who are in this call. Also, we have some observers from ODC, Office of Drug Control. We also have Representative Roberta Anna from the Environment Ministry of Italy, who are organizing the pre-COP. And I think we also have some colleagues joining from the UK presidency, but I'm not sure if I recognize their name as well. But we have also maybe in the registration, we also received registrations from Chinese delegates and the Nigerian Environment Ministry. So if you're here, we would very much want to recognize your presence, colleagues, and we're very grateful that you're observing and engaging in this dialogue with us. The next question I would like to take is a question that was posted in the YouTube, I believe. Yeah, it's about talking about economic consequences of this crisis. So the question goes, due to the lack of financial capacity and hike in food prices, lives and properties of people are being affected. And also in context of Nigeria, And some other countries, they were in also some violent attacks due to the fact that palliatives were not getting to the people at the bottom of the economical table. And because this is a serious crisis and like people are, taking this seriously, how are we going to tackle this? That was one question. And I see another question in this in the chat that is about how does the pandemic virus, this is from Esmat from Indonesia, how does the pandemic virus outbreak bring good new in terms of decreasing greenhouse gas emissions? Could we be optimistic for a changing human behavioral as a lesson from this pandemic situation? Then I also see, so these two questions, I see an X from just now who said Kate EO. So I would ask Ina to kindly make Kate EO as a panelist so she can just briefly, or he can briefly present the question, and then Inger, you can respond to the three of them.
It's all good. You're good.
So Kate,
Hi,
are you
can you guys hear
able
me?
to? Yep, perfectly, yes.
Hi, I'm Kate from Singapore. So my question is, because oil prices fell to $- today, and how do you think this will affect the green movement going forward, especially in a time like this when the polluting industries are using this pandemic to gain billions of dollars in bailouts? And with oil being $, will this make switching to renewables like a disincentive for governments?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So first of all, it's great that we have folks from IRENA, ODC, Italy, and possibly the UK presidency. This is really wonderful. Welcome. On the first question, and I'm sorry, I didn't get the name of the person that asked about the economic consequences of the crisis. Lives are impacted, food prices are going up. How will we tackle these questions? I think that clearly this is where the whole issue around global solidarity comes in. Look, in all countries, even in wealthy countries, it is the poorest who have carried the burden the most. But obviously in the poorer countries, the burden is much heavier. And so we need to, and the UN has stepped up together with many other organizations to provide emergency support through any variety of means. At the UN, we have reformed, and we have a core person, a key person called the resident coordinator in each country who coordinates the entire UN presence in that country. And so in Kenya, for example, the resident coordinator has been the one that has been ensuring that there is a degree of coordination of support, including the launch of a flash appeal for support, additional support, precisely to protect the poorest. So, and on the 30th of June, so what am I talking about? March, the Secretary General launched his or our response, and the global response with solidarity for COVID-19. And there's been quite a lot of global backing up by member states, by UN member states around this response. Currently, the UN Development Group is preparing an overarching plan or platform by which we will invite all agencies in to support countries. Because you are absolutely right, lives are affected, the poorest are the most impacted, food prices are going up. And in East Africa, what we're particularly concerned about is the locust infestation. It's massive. We had the first generation of locusts in December, January, and now the next generation is coming, and it's 400 times as strong, experts say. So there is a lot to be said for action, which leads me to Esmat's question, because she speaks about the imperative of understanding how all of this connects to climate. First, let's be clear that COVID-19 was not caused by climate change, just to be clear. And not that Esmat said so, but I just want to be absolutely clear. However, can future viruses, will there be more future viruses because of climate change? I have been asked this. It's highly possible. What happens when the permafrost melts? What kind of viruses will be released from there? What happens if we do more forest landscape degradation, where animals are being forced into living in closer proximity? So there are some connects not to be missed. And then Esma's question was, well, so how is this impacting, this reduction in CO2 emissions? How is that impacting, or is it impacting on climate change? The answer, Esma, is it's not impacting a whole lot. It's impacting in how your local air is at the local level in city X or city Y. But don't forget that since the industrial age, we've been putting CO2 into the atmosphere every day, every day, every day. And so if every day we've been putting that in, a 2-week, 4-week, 8-week, 9-week, 10-week respite, it's just a little blip. And if you look at the Mauna Loa, the Keeling curve, by which we measure parts per million, and so we measure CO2 in the atmosphere, you can see it's not impacted at all. So if we were to see an impact, we would need to, and we don't want to do that, lock down the world for a year, stop the economic engines for a year, and then maybe you would see a little blip. So no, that is not the answer. As I said in the beginning, the answer is in a fundamental rethink of our energy and our transport system, and in a fundamental rethink of sustainable production and consumption. And that is where we need to go. And that is why COP26 will be so critical, so that countries can come with these ambitious NDCs. Now is not the time to de-accelerate. Now is the time to accelerate, because if we've learned anything from COVID, it is that we can take global action. And Kate from Singapore, on the oil prices going negative in the US market because of storage, there was not enough storage. They keep pumping it up because you can't just close a well. And so we have these negative prices. How will this impact climate change? I'm not a futurist, so I can't tell you this, but I believe that there are two roads that countries can take. One, we can make it so cheap and we can all go back to oil and pollute our way to a 5, 6, 7 degree world. Or we can continue the drive that we have started on renewables. And I think that with the kind of understanding and the kind of science that we have now, with the degree of commitment and with the climate change we are already seeing happening in regions, with the impacts that this is having on the poor, with the impact that this is having on our harvests and our reliability on nature to feed us, I think we must believe that we as a relatively intelligent species will take the right decision. So let us not be fooled by a temporary blip in oil prices going super low because there's a glut. Let us continue to be committed on the climate direction. And that's where, again, as I said before, youth and young people have carried a heavy burden on bringing the climate issue to the global attention. Don't let up. Don't let up. Stay engaged. Back over to you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much, Ingrid, for that very interesting.
Great. I would like to take 2 more questions from the Slido on the YouTube. We have, well, we're on Earth Day, but which is only a month away from World Environment Day, in which direction we're moving on the great topic of biodiversity. So we have a question for that as well. We have the question, how can we ensure stricter how can we ensure stricter restrictions on the loss of biodiversity hotspots from getting lost forever for development? And then we have a second question here. Dear Ms. Ingrid Andersen, would you think our interactions with animals will change post COVID-19 in terms of proximity, trade, laws, and ethics?
These are good questions. So let me just take these, and it is Earth Day today. And let's just take one moment to understand the magnificence of what the planet is. But let's also take one moment just to you've all done it, I'm sure. Zoom out into the solar system. And there's this little blue planet, like a speck. That's it. So when you think about that little speck of dust in this vast ocean of the universe, it's probably worthwhile taking good care of it. We're so self-centered, we think it's all about us, but it isn't. It's about these Earth system and how finely intertuned they are, and how what we grow gives us the air we breathe, the water we drink, the miracle of photosynthesis, converting light to energy, to water, to oxygen. It's a miracle. And we are so lackadaisically wasting this away. So Earth Day is a moment to stop and to be aware, and to be aware of planet Earth and our duty to protect it. Because in protecting it, we are protecting ourselves. And so on the question around stricter I think it was about stricter guidelines around loss of biodiversity, especially hotspots, and how the relentless pressure for development is undermining that. You know, we have an agreement called the Biodiversity Convention, where we have made some commitments in 2010 in Nagoya when we met. And unfortunately, these commitments that we made, we have not adhered to them as much as we promised 10 years ago as a global community. So the spotlight, and why we had sort of named this year the super year for nature, and I still think it can be a super year for nature, because we need to understand we can't live without nature, was precisely to try to get more of a focus on the imperatives of conservation and on sustainable use of conservation of biodiversity and genetic resources, etc., etc. It's only by managing that we can get there. Now, unlike biodiversity is local in that it is in my backyard or in your backyard or in your country. So it takes national action first under a global umbrella. And that's where, frankly, youth movements, indigenous people, civil society organizations, everybody have to hold everyone's feet to the fire. Make sure that there are laws in place in gazetted areas, that laws are upheld. Many court cases to protect biodiversity under the law have taken place around the world. And that's not without importance. We live in a world of rule of law, and where what is on the books need to be protected. And do make sure that we understand it's not just protection for protection's sake, although that matters too, and the intrinsic value of nature is certainly important, and indigenous people will tell us so. But it is protection for our own sake. If we lose it, we have nothing. I mean, so we need to understand that it is certainly, yes, for nature's sake, and some people speak about the rights of nature, but it's also for our own human rights, for our ability to sustain ourselves. And that's where the Sustainable Development Goals have come in very helpfully, because we put as goal 1 poverty reduction, we put as goal 2 ending hunger, we put as goal 3, etc. We could go through them all, education, what have you. But you can't do that without the functions that feeds us, that clothes us, that houses us, and that's all provided by nature. So the sustainable use of and the conservation and protection of nature is critical. And so that ambitious agreement, as you know, in Kunming, we will have COP15, where Egypt will hand the baton to China. And these two countries have done a lot of heavy lifting together with many other countries, I hasten to add, for an ambitious agreement on biodiversity. We now need to get not just the agreement, but the means of implementation and the financing for it. Biodiversity is not something for the wealthy countries to sort of have and protect. It's for all of us. And so I look forward to your strong engagement and your strong voice on this agenda as well.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Anderson, for that. Again, and perhaps I know we have to conclude in next few minutes. So the only thing I would like to mention is that the time that we have from now until the World Environment Day and the activation period in the lead up to the World Environment Day, we from the youth group side are also organizing. For example, we are working very closely with the comms division in the UNEP, and we convened a youth task force with around 18 youth representatives and organizations from different regions that are going to be mobilizing within their regions, and also discussing about a youth action portal on UNEP's website to be featuring youth actions and mobilization on that. So I just wanted to also underscore the importance of this period that we are in utilizing virtual dialogues, which often, I mean, from my experience now, are more inclusive. So there are many questions, and I apologize to everyone whose questions we could not take. There are questions about interlinkages between SDGs and green economy, about how we control the waste from COVID-19 mask, which is a very innovative question, I would say, coming out of masks that we are using for COVID-19, and also, in general about how young people should be responding. So maybe we can convene another dialogue with you in maybe a month and a half from now during the World Environment Day, and we do this again with more experiences of what young people have done. But I would like to pass on back to you to close this session, and maybe to Teresa first, and then invite you to close this session, and we meet you again very soon.
So who goes, Teresa or me? Oops. Okay.
Just thank you very much, Yugradna, for directly re-inviting Ms. Anderson. Very sneaky.
No problem.
Lovely. Perfect. No, but it's a good point.
I tried.
To connect to that I wanted to. How is it? Power is taken, not given. Yeah, to everyone who has mentioned questions, we have those questions. We will keep them. We have regularly newsletters, so we will take them as inspirations for topics there. And if you would like to have more opportunities to engage, to see Inger Anderson on in the negotiations, or to actually talk to your national governments, which is extremely crucial because they are the ones that are actually voting on issues, then feel free to get back to us and get engaged. Just a little heads up, we have a webinar coming next week with two of our dear colleagues from UNEP, Aurora Chung and Letizia Zobel, about how to become an accredited organization with UNEP. So if you would like to get more into this and also be officially accredited, then please reach out, and that is really crucial to get involved there in those mechanisms that we have to engage on the level of United Nations Environmental Programme negotiations. So thank you very much from my side for being here to everyone, and I'm handing over for the final words to Ms. Anderson.
Well, thank you to you, Teresa, and to, oops, now my book is falling down, and to Yugradna. It's been a real pleasure to be part of this, and I thank you for the initiative. And it just goes to show we didn't have to spend much carbon footprint, and having a good meeting, and we didn't have to traipse all over the world. So I think we will learn a lot from COVID. One shout out that I just want to give to all of you for mobilizing and for being very active in the UNEP processes. And by the way, please remember we're a United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, that's who we are. And also a shout out to the fact that we have today launched Earth School, which will we've launched it together with TED-Ed, so the educational branch of TEDx, if you like, National Geographic, and lots of other organizations. For 30 days between now and World Environment Day, there will be learning. Now it's sort of up to 18 in terms of, and I know that there are many who are university and beyond in this call, but just to say, please keep this in mind and send it to younger people. It's an opportunity for those who are stranded at home to learn about environment and the activities that they can take themselves. And finally then to say, from UNEP, the takeaway that we have, and it's nice that it was the question on medical waste and masks and gloves. We are seeing in some countries an increased waste stream, therefore. So my 3 takeaways, the actions that we need to take right now. Well, first of all, deal with the medical, which is not what we do at UNEP. But secondly, yes, deal with medical waste and the waste stream and the chemical streams and the hazardous waste streams. They're going to be enormous. Secondly, be sure to engage in biodiversity because zoonoses and zoonotic diseases are not new. Marburg, Seaburg, Zika, West Nile, Ebola, SARS, H1N1, etc., etc. Each of these were diseases that came from animals and came to us through intermediary species. So the second point, engage on biodiversity. And third, as these stimulus packages come out, let's build back better. And finally, do not make the environment the enemy. The environment is your friend, which is why we celebrate Earth Day today, which is why each of us has the duty to protect planet Earth, because planet Earth protects us. To all, I thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to continuing to engaging with the network. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Inger, everyone from the governments, and you two were listening. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.